was studying non-destructive testing, I went into the office of the school, the training center, before I was kidnapped, and I acquired all of the books I would have needed for my study. They were in my attache case, which was stolen while I was on the streets trying to attend the school. And in there was a article from a publication, a trade publication that I had read. It was in the office, the lobby of the training center, and I had it, and I had handwritten in a notebook, which was also in the attaché case, an initial response to my first reading of this article. It was on computerized radiography. Regarding, it was an article on intermediaries in radiography. I had handwritten a response, I had not typed it up, and it was stolen along with all of the other information that was in my attaché case. But I ended up attempting to rewrite that article. I wrote a revision of my initial response, and I gave a version of it to the person who was my instructor in radiographic film interpretation level 2. I never heard back from him what ended up happening with that, but I also never heard back from him what ended up happening with the first version of my actual radiographic film interpretation level 2 exam, which was put in a very specific format and had a specific level of detail that I was told was not necessary for the exam at that time, but meets the standards I would consider to be acceptable for what I was training and for the purposes and intents behind why I began to study non-destructive testing. I never agreed to do anything under any sort of classified helm, especially without an acknowledgement and confirmation to whom I would be considered to be classified. I also made a third effort. I wrote a follow-up to the initial response. I have one that is dated for April 27th, 2017. Response to article on intermediates in radiography, dated April 27th, 2017. And then I have follow-up to April 27th, 2017. Response to article on intermediates in radiography, dated for January 2nd, 2018. I have a specific format when I engage this kind of composition. And when you're doing radiographic film interpretation and you are coming up or you're presenting a report, there are actually templates associated with reports that are proprietary information of the person performing the inspection. I have my own proprietary model regarding what would be an official formal inspection report. And as a matter of fact, while one of these is in the format it is in, the one from January 2nd, 2018 is the official version. And I printed it on May 30th of 2019. It is the official version of that, not only as a template for what would be my proprietary format regarding an official inspection report, including the printing of that report, but also the way that I would indicate it in order to acknowledge and to confirm that it was actually something I provided as a formal official version. That was meant to be on the record, and that was meant to be the one that would be considered the original. It's in paper. If you make a copy, you have to acknowledge and label that it's a copy. It's not the original. If you try to make a digital duplicate or you try to make an electronic file based on a scan of the copy, you have to acknowledge it's a scan of the copy or it's a scan of the original. All of these things have to be acknowledged, and then they have to be verified in terms of what they are actually in the representation of the original. Now, I'm not going to read it now, but in this specific one I have right here is a discussion about what I understand to be a proprietary technique that's not unique to me, having to do with touch and how that factors into authentication. So when you take my documents, when you take what is actually physically mine, there is a means and a manner in which which it can be identified. And you really are not qualified to be engaged in or at this level unless you understand that and know that. And if you engage in deception around your cognizability of that and you attempt to abuse that, it will be understood and ascertained by those who are actually qualified. When you lie, intentionally misrepresent information, including when you say you don't know something that you do, there's a way that this is revealed. This is very important. This is why intent is important. I can't change that. Even if you try to go back and reconstruct the lineage, or you try to make some sort of interference in the magnetosphere associated with an individual person, you try to engage psychological operations in order to undermine their confidence in their own memory. Sometimes memory lapses happen. There's no problem with acknowledging that you remember. I didn't remember it accurately at the time, but insofar as I do recall, this is what I recall. There's no problem with that. There's nothing shameful about that. There's also nothing wrong with changing your mind. At some point down the road, more information came to light. You met other people. You analyzed. You decided, I've changed my perspective. I've changed my stance. I have a different understanding of how to comport myself in accordance with what I understand to be my principles or my values. However, attempting to obscure or obstruct what is necessary information for someone to be safe is not acceptable. Now, I'm in a kind of a conundrum at the moment. I'm not going to lie. I had hoped to get a temporary or a part-time job and work it diligently. There's nothing wrong or shameful or disrespectful or insulting about getting a job, including a manual labor job, or a job that would be in retail or warehousing or stocking. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a time-honored tradition in the United States to get a job, make a wage, pay for schooling, pay for something else you want to do, maybe save up a little money to invest in a business, maybe get together a little nest egg so that you can put a down payment on a home. That doesn't speak to or impugn your character or your capability to do pretty much anything else. That you take on legitimate labor at an organization or a private company or somebody that has need, including a physical labor or manual labor, if you are capable of performing some form of manual labor, lifting, packing, walking. For a time, I worked quality assurance at a job where I got to sit down while everybody else stood on the assembly line. Now, personally, at that time, I was not physically capable of standing for 8 hours a day. I was able to sit down to do the kind of job I did on that assembly line. But I'm able to stand now, and I'm able to walk. And there's nothing shameful or insulting or degrading to me about even doing a job where I would be required to stand for 8 hours in an assembly line working with other competent people to make a quality product that's legal, and including one that might have some sort of special kind of process associated with it that is able to win competitions or is able to enliven people. All of these things are positive experiences one could have. And just because I was physically incapacitated at one point in time and was able to work in that situation sitting down, now that I'm able to stand and walk, there's no insult to being in a job, including a production line, that's honest and competent and legal. There's no insult to that. But what is insulting is an understanding that other people have prevented me from being able to do even that kind of work with even the level of dignity that kind of work has. Because they have already determined, based on some sort of completely fraudulent and misrepresentative paradigm, that they want certain things about my human capital attributed to other people elsewhere. Now, there's possibilities for concurrent processes running at the same time. It's part of how the derivatives economy was supposed to work. You have an underlying that provides a certain level of security. It has a specific kind of character, and that underlying is doing what it's doing while other things are supported in being able to do what they do. And depending upon the kind of situation that underlying was characterized in or in regards to, there are things about what the underlying is explicitly involved in that can be gleaned, discerned, or even confirmed based upon its capacity to track or observe or intersect with, including understanding that certain benchmarks are met when what is going in concurrent to that underlying does what it's supposed to do, that then supports the stability and the creditability as well as the value of what that underlying is. Somehow, in the last 20 years, at least, if not longer, that process has been completely intentionally sabotaged. I know this. I know enough about this. You can't allow for this kind of derivative economy when you've intentionally slandered and mischaracterized and refused to do what you are legally required to do in order to assure that your underlying instruments are safe. When you embed and encode your underlying instruments for sabotage or misrepresent them and still intentionally defraud people, including the people providing the security on that underlying, you sabotage everything. So that production line becomes unsafe. Somebody's coded to break a bottle. Somebody's coded to break their hand after they've broken that bottle. You've got cameras that are trying to make sure that person cuts their hand and has to get some sort of treatment for the injury in order to meet the benchmark that you're trying to cover on a fraudulently determined and mischaracterized underlying instrument, because there's no reason to have an underlying instrument connected to that process. There's no reason to be intentionally banking on sabotaging the safety of somebody working in a production line in order to meet benchmarks that have been set up on that underlying. There's an inappropriate pairing and matching. Why would you force it? This is part of what a regulator, in conjunction with an inspector, is supposed to do. We're not just talking about offsetting your risk by making sure you can keep it off the ledger long enough to qualify for the swap on your defaulted debt. That is not acceptable. Now, I know sometime last summer, and somebody thought they were going to move forward on that paradigm, that they were just going to continue to trash their own economy. They were going to find people like me that are very productive and very capable and just keep trashing us. And when the time came, when it became useful, including when the time came when it got to the deadline by which somebody could get them, because they've actually been caught in commission of crime, they've accumulated such a massive default, and they're just going to swap it out to somebody else. And usually the swap out is meant to sabotage to whomever it's being swapped. But you guys have played this dirty game so long. You expect to get dirty things back. You've made your culture perverse. And you've tried to extol a certain kind of performance in that perversity rather than dealing with matters responsibly. And this is what was reflected in those changes to the ASNT standards last summer when it came to testing for personnel that were qualified to participate in training of non-destructive testing. This is what was evident in the manner in which there was a revisionist recapitulation of the processes by which those standards were presented to people that were supposed to be engaged in non-destructive testing and certifying other people for participation in non-destructive testing. It is not appropriate to lure people that have a high level of skill and capability and personal experience, including in industries and sectors where non-destructive testing is literally necessary in order to maintain safety. Get them in, harvest them, put them into an intentionally sabotaged automated process where then they're forced for how many years to demonstrate resiliency while you steal from them and then transmit it to other people who you have coded to operate without cognizance or consciousness of how the processes they're parroting work. There was a very important time frame where there was a particular kind of legacy transmission that needed to happen. And there were people that were retiring, and they had expertise, and they had abilities included in connected to legacy technologies that were being innovated. And that legacy needed to be transmitted to a new generation of people. There were critiques about racism. There were critiques about cultural appropriation. There were critiques about sexism, Orientalism. All of these things were very important. It's one of the reasons why we're supposed to be able to be balanced and well-rounded in our experience. But what happened is I've seen is that you entirely stripped an entire generation, including of the analytical capability to self-analyze, and created products with the intent that you were going to recruit people to come in and just basically get downloaded with a process they performed and allow for there to be a construction of underlying instrumentality financing their performance. So you have people that are performing in roles and saying things that may even sound technically sophisticated, and they look the part. You've got the pretty package. They don't understand what they're talking about. Somebody else is being drawn on to actually provide the actual quality and the actual content of their performance. And that is not appropriate. That is not fair, it's not legal, and it's not sustainable. Because what ends up happening at the end of the day is when you assert your right to have acknowledgement and confirmation on the work you did, because gaining and affirming experience in certain sectors is necessary to establish credentialing and justifying expertise that gives you the credibility and accreditability to assure safety, including financial safety, for the processes in which you're involved. You don't want to acknowledge who's actually financing it. Why? Why do you want people that look pretty and look handsome performing in something that may sound appropriate at the moment, but they cannot verify it, and you won't let them know who they need to go to verify it? Resiliency is not sexy. Resiliency is a crime, and it has been compounding. You do not intentionally develop processes embedded with acts of sabotage so you can attempt to extort and manipulate people into agreeing to compromise safety and standards in order to offset liability happening on a concurrent process and then punish them when they refuse to compromise on safety and standards in the literal application of the duties that they are performing in the moment. This is what you've been doing for several years. So, my plan to get a job, doing completely dignified work, hopefully doing it with people that are involved with very important things relative to the sector they're involved in the culture, in the community, in the kind of need we have, was intentionally sabotaged. And so what am I going to do? Wanting to get a temporary job, a part-time job, in order to save up money, to go through a process of what is a necessary recertification in order for me to maintain my certification to non-destructive testing, despite the fact that nobody would acknowledge what they were extracting from me, so that I could get confirmation on my experience hours in order to qualify for other levels and kinds of certification. I had to maintain my own, and I had to create my own process, which I'm entitled to do, including based upon a adhering to and a certification and qualification at a particular standard that comports with an acknowledged standards body.
But in the meantime, you've changed the qualifications connected to the personnel who are allowed to be certified. And what you've done is completely unsafe. You've created a situation where you reward people for refusing to follow through on what is or had been previously required in order to qualify. And this trade-off is don't ask, don't tell. Somebody else is going to get that information and somebody else is going to process it. And even if you know, because you're supposed to know, that there was crime or that there was intentional sabotage, you're only supposed to be responsible for this right now. Nobody's going to hold you accountable for that. Don't ask to get paid for anything that happens. Don't ask to get credit for any of the quality you do, especially if it's 1, 2, 3, or 4 levels above what you're being acknowledged for in your direct realm. But at the same time, whatever that is, it's not your responsibility. You don't know about that. We don't know about that. And that's not acceptable. You've made it unsafe to even work in a damn grocery store. You've also made it very cheap, where otherwise it didn't need to be. And you're not going to be able to sustain that in any way, shape, or form. I have been providing underlying security instruments for a lot of very high-profile people for a very, very long time. And a certain group of people have misrepresented allegations of crime in order to keep me in a process where my consistency and my maintenance of standards, including standards associated with what is constitutional and legal, allow for an accrual of a particular kind of default. And they just hope that by blocking me off, that they can continue this sort of game of chicken. Charity, we're not going to stop. We are going to keep doing this, and unless you agree to concede and cooperate with our criminality, we're just going to keep compounding it. And because nobody's going to bust these banks, and nobody's going to bust these brokers, because they've been doing it for so long, they're just going to do it for another year. And in the meantime, all you're going to do is make it more and more catastrophic. And then we're just going to swap it out with somebody else. And all of those people you used to know. And all of those people you might actually have a family connection with. Those engineers, those academics, those people in government service. All of those people are going to have to deal with the fact that you did not agree to cooperate with us and fulfill the demographic experience requirements we put upon you. You are already signed up to be harvested and farmed out for somebody else's use value. You keep resisting. It's very good what you make, it is, but it's never going to benefit the people it's intended for, because we've already put the claim on you and your property. And as long as you don't give us what we want, we're just going to trade it with somebody else, and they're going to have to deal with it. We're not going to actually go after the criminal culprits in our milieu. You're our property. If you get too cheap, we're just going to swap you out. We have a different consideration of valuation. That's why we're only going to let you work in a food store and only let you work there if you agree to help us hook up derivatives for our legal pot empire. Don't you understand? The last 5 years, everything lets you know the only viable option you have is to reject and repudiate everything else you are capable of doing. You would be a fantastic face for our legal marijuana economy. And we're not going to let you do anything else, which means all of this other stuff is supposed to go to who? You guys have already set your legal marijuana economy up for utter failure. Your hybridization regime is not going to work. There was a time when hybridization had a merit. There's a certain kind of quality. You can't do that anymore with the bad faith and deceit you've replaced the economy with. And you're not going to get away with swapping out your crime and trash to other people after you've intentionally trashed what they had to give you, hoping that you just pick it up at such a discount. They're never going to get enough money to pay off the debts you've put them in. That's what you've done. You've used people's lives as loans you did not qualify for. And that's why somebody with my capabilities who wants to be able to go through a legitimate process of recertification within the time frame I would need to hook up the situations I would need to get the money to pay for the training, I'm not allowed to do that. You're not even going to let me work at a food store at a minimum wage so that I can save up money to qualify to take the trainings I would need in order to be able to recertify. I came up with a budget. It works. But I can't meet my budget if the requirement for me to work in a food store is to let you use this, to let you use my legal filings, to let you use my work as an award-winning journalist and editor, to let you use my work on an emergency preparedness and prevention paradigm that was supposed to be a part of a multi-city rollout regarding emergency preparedness as insurance to cover up for narcos that have infiltrated the government and tried to give us legal pot while they're in open, flagrant violations of the Constitution in a completely contrived impeachment process that's just serving right now to do what? In 1 year, I'd be able to make all the requirements that I needed to make. You won't let me work at a food store without trying to extort me through chemical warfare. That is how unsustainable you are. There's no way you can swap it. You need to relinquish. And if you don't, it's going to destroy you. Because it's like this double-edged sword. If I don't get to work in order to save up money and meet the benchmarks to qualify for my recertification, you have created a ticking time bomb. And everybody knows you're holding a ticking time bomb and trying to convince somebody it's a baby and you need to take care of it. They're not going to do that. It's you. It's you. Every one of you that thought you were going to walk around and play this little game. I can't do anything about it. If you don't relinquish your completely unjustified attempt to squat on my life, it is completely going to blow up in your face over and over again every day for the next year. What otherwise could be me working toward benchmarks for recertification in order to provide a necessary service regarding safety of industrial facilities and materials, I can't do it because you won't get your fucking ass off my life. I can't. I have everything I need. I have everything I need to help other people recover their economic value, put themselves into a situation where they're able to do what they need to do. Whoever you are that thought you were entitled to pretend you were me, you're holding a goddamn fucking bomb and nobody's going to be able to defuse it and nobody's going to be able to take it from you. That's what it means for you to keep squatting on my life. Get the fuck off my property. I don't need to shoot you. You made a bomb out of my life and you never let it fucking go. It's gonna blow up in your fucking face.